Hello, friends. Did you miss us? Oh, we missed you. We are back with episode 191 of the R Weekly Highlights podcast, our first episode for the year 2025. I was just telling my awesome co-host here, I'll introduce shortly, it feels normal again. But yes, my name is iamYannC, and I am delighted you join us from wherever you are around the world. This is the weekly podcast, unless we had an extended break like we just had, where we talk about the great happenings and resources that have been shared in this week's R Weekly issue. And yes, I was solo for a bit there at the end, but no, not this time. I was right with the world because my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas, is back here joining me on the mic. So how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Eric. It feels good to be back. I apologize to have been solo there towards the end of 2024, but I am committed and determined in 2025 here to get us at least to our 200th episode. We are close to that milestone, and I'm confident we're going to go well beyond that.
Yes, there's always hurdles in the podcasting world, but 200 is a nice one to achieve. So we will get there, and then the chips will fall where they may, so to speak. We will find out. But as always, it's always so much fun when I don't do this alone. So I'm glad you could join me today. And also, the R Weekly project is possible because of the community. And our curation team is back at it after some well-deserved rest. And we got a fancy updated calendar from yours truly to boot to keep us honest with it. But this week's issue was curated by Batol Almarzak, and she had a whopper of resources to look at because this built up over 3 weeks, I believe, since our last issue. So she had a lot to pick from. Our team that are awesome voting as usual. But as always, she had tremendous help from our R-Wiki team members and, of course, the community like you around the world with your poll requests and suggestions. It is 2025. You know that this year, just like last year and parts of 2023, there is going to be a common theme in many of the advancements in the tech sector. So we do have some very interesting uses of AI to talk about. And you're talking to two co-hosts here that can be a bit skeptical on certain pieces of it. But I will say I learned something from each of these that we're going to talk about here. And the first one we're going to talk about is a very extensive and frankly enlightening analysis of conversation sentiment and summarization on the new Bluesky social platform that we've been talking highly about. And in particular, this post comes from Stephen Turner, who has been on the highlights feature previously. He is the head of genomic strategy at Colossal Biosciences. And he is no stranger to investigating AI models. And in fact, some of his posts from last year were concentrated on using the open source models that certainly I've been very curious about, particularly the Llama models coming from Facebook and Meta. And he does mention, they are getting better. There's been a lot of hype around them. He does mention in the post it's not quite there yet, matching the hype, which again, in this space, you got to be careful. There's always a lot of hype going around this area. But with the recent development as of last year of Hadley Wickham's Elmer package, which I've had a bit of time to try, and we've covered on the highlights before, it opens this new framework of being able to try not just open source models, but also, as Stephen calls, the frontier, or you might say hosted-based models. We're talking about, of course, like OpenAI's ChatGPT and others, including one that I don't have a lot of experience with, but the anthropic, easy for me to say, Claude models, which do get talked about quite highly in the world of development. So he thought, what a great, what use case could be that he could compare how the models are doing, particularly this anthropic Claude model with the Llama models. So he thought, well, Bluesky is now got a lot of momentum, a lot of great conversations to be had about our favorite language, the R language, as well as other domain-specific science groups that are coming there. So he thought, well, you know what? I am going to do an analysis of these Bluesky posts comparing how well these different models actually summarize a large number of these posts over a given duration of like months or even a year. So what's the tooling that's going to be involved here? Well, with the momentum Bluesky has had, there is a very awesome package. We may have mentioned it last year called ATRRR, or Adder, I don't know how to say it, that is authored by Johannes Gruber, that basically talks to the API behind the scenes that Bluesky is using in their operations of how they kind of federate all the posts. And Stephen was able to grab 1,000 of these posts that have been tagged with the rstats hashtag, which is, again, very familiar back in the, you might call it the glory days of the Twitter days, where we all use the rstats hashtag to share our happenings and our questions and our finds and whatnot. So, as always, there's always a little bit of cleaning to do after you get those posts. So use a little dplyr to clean up the text of those posts and get it ready to be supplied to an AI model. And by the way, all the code that Stephen has produced here is shared via gist that we'll have linked to in the show notes as well. Very well structured. Stephen is definitely a veteran of robust R code, and he shows that in his code here. So once the Bluesky posts are prepared, the text behind those, then the next step is to feed that into the models. So he's going to treat this like an experiment, which I would expect someone like Stephen to do, where he's leveraging 4 models. There's a Claude model, the Llama 3.3, Gemma 2, and Mistral. So, and there may be, we'll have to look in the results of this as we get there, but he's going to run the experiments on each of these. How well does it summarize? And then he's being transparent about this too. He will share the results, the summarized results of these posts via a GitHub gist in Markdown, but he's not just manually copying all those however many summaries are. No, he's using the Gister package offered by Scott Chamberlain previously from his R Open Sci days to automatically put that on as a gist. So that's some pretty slick stuff. So I'll have to take tabs on that for future reference. So the results. This will either be surprising to you or not surprising to you. I will admit I'm not too surprised based on what I heard. He does say that the Claude model, the Sonnet model in particular, was by leaps and bounds much better at summarizing the content of these Bluesky posts than the open source versions of these. Well, and when you run these hosted models, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? You have to buy the tokens, if you will, to leverage these API services. So you are going to pay a little bit depending on how much you used it. Now, he does say the cost of it, which again, luckily in this case is not breaking the bank. It's basically pennies on the dollar for this particular case. But let's say you scale this up at a company or whatnot, you got to watch this sort of thing. But he does have an excerpt of the summary produced by Sonnet in this post, and it is very, he's not wrong. This is a very concise summary that looks to be pretty on target for the time period that he analyzed in these Bluesky posts. And Mike and I were just talking about the Use R conference that's about to happen. That is part of the summary here that's going to be held in Duke University in 2024, talking about some of the notable themes such as visualization, tutorials, generative art, mobile development. I think we know where the mobile development one came from. That was when Colin Fay made the splash late last year on the mobile app powered by R and Shiny that's now available, which is included in this summary. Points about community engagement, the hashtags that were used in these posts, notable authors. I mean, that's top-notch stuff, as well as the top posts, the top 10, if you will, that were authored here, and such as Hadley's post about posit join opensourcepledge.com, as well as others from Daniel Navarro and others included. So you'll have to go to the gist that he made to look at the rest of the model summary, the summaries from the other models. He does give a preview that they are quite different than what Bluesky authored, going from just, looks like something that anybody could summarize just in high level overview, or just listing summaries from each post individually instead of like the whole collection of them. So unfortunately, this is consistent with what I'm hearing from others I trust in the community, that the open source models are gaining traction, but there's still a gap in terms of certain domains and what they can analyze or summarize well and what they can produce well in these models. There is some bonus material in this post, but there is another framework for running LLMs in R that I'm not as familiar with. It's called MAL from the ML verse, an interesting way to get predictions powered by large language models, not just like summarizing what's there, but actually predicting content as well. And he shows excerpts based on what he did to predict the top 10 most liked posts from the past week, and then also translated into another language on top of it. So pretty slick stuff, I must say. I never tried anything like that, but that's a good way to do the translation and also do a sentiment analysis on top of that, which, spoiler alert, a lot of positive vibes on Bluesky. Let's hope that continues, because I like to have a little positivity in my life. Nonetheless, another applied type problem that was tackled here by Stephen, really starting to see where are the trade-offs between the hosted models, the open source models. It's certainly my hope that the open source models do catch up, because there are certain things I want to leverage AI for that I don't really feel comfortable throwing over to a hosted provider, and who knows what they're going to do with that information. I want to be in control of that. I'm starting some self-hosted things where I am in control of that. But, as with anything in open source, innovation can take time. The iterations are probably going to have to be a little bit more before they can be on par with these solutions. But Stephen does a great job, again, summarizing his experiment very well. The code is well documented, well commented, and some food for thought for sure. But at least the positive vibes have been, proven, if you will, in this experiment, that they're there, and some great content that we're seeing here. So mixed reaction for me in terms of the end game of it, but nonetheless, I think a great analysis to kick off the highlights here.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. And I think you can probably hear the skepticism in both of our voices around this type of content for a while now. But I think we'd also be remiss to, not admit that there are definitely some use cases here where there's value. I've seen people like Sharon Mackless on Bluesky talk a lot about how much better they feel Claude does at generating accurate R code compared to ChatGPT. I have not really tried that out yet. I've used ChatGPT. To be honest with you, sort of where I've found the most value is in generating code for other languages that aren't my first language, but I have enough programming experience to be able to sniff out the issues, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's where I'm finding the biggest value. But if I was just to try to blindly use it to generate R code, from my experience in the past, and I probably haven't tried in the last month or two, but it wasn't code that I wanted to use, or I could have written it just as fast as having the model generate it for us. But I'm assuming that these leaders, Claude and ChatGPT, are probably fairly equivalent, as you mentioned, in their ability to summarize information. There is this gap, right, between the paid hosted models versus the open source that we have. But my hope is that the open source models continue to plug along, right? They're going to lag a little bit, but hopefully, in 6 months from now or 12 months from now, they'll sort of catch up to where the Claudes and the ChatGPTs of the world are currently. So we'll see. And I can't help but notice in the Claude Sonnet's sort of summarization of all the Bluesky posts and how Stephen's able to spit that out into Markdown, I think, that he puts in his blog, it looks a whole lot like the R Weekly homepage in terms of the latest. It's all the latest news from the R ecosystem. So I don't know if the R Weekly team can use something like this to make their lives easier in terms of content curation on a week-to-week basis, or pull requests or God knows what these days. But I don't know. It got my wheels turning potentially. That one small hallucination that Stephen points out, which was pretty interesting, it's that Use Our conference on August 8th through the 10th, and the post itself on Bluesky doesn't have a year. So the model stuck 2024 on there, but obviously
you're right. I didn't even catch that. Thanks for keeping me honest.
Yeah, no
goodness.
problem. Stephen has a little tiny footnote at the bottom of the blog post that points that out, and the year should actually be 2025, obviously, because it's an upcoming conference. But it's an interesting little gotcha, and as I look into the sentiment analysis that was done as well, that's driven by a large language model. I'm trying to wrap my head around the utility there as well, because, the weird thing about these generative AI models, as opposed to, something that's more deterministic or traditional machine learning model, is you could put the same inputs in and you may not get the same output every time.
Exactly.
So if you're trying to leverage an LLM for sentiment analysis, how do you deal with the idea that that analysis may not be reproducible, right? Because the sentiment may be slightly different. The sentiment output may be slightly different the second time that you put the same inputs in. So to me, I have a little bit of a hard time wrestling with that. I mean, I think for exploratory work and just creative work and things like that, for the purposes of this blog post, just a one-time little sentiment analysis, didn't have to be reproducible or anything like that. I think, absolutely, it's totally fine. But if you are, considering trying to do more robust, build more of a robust framework and process around doing sentiment analysis, in your organization or something like that, I think that's probably one thing that you should consider, right? If you're deciding whether to use, a machine learning approach versus this generative AI sentiment analysis approach. But it was interesting. Love the fact that most of the sentiment was very positive. That is at extreme odds with what I have seen on the other app, the old app, where the sentiment seems to be quite different. And I can't say enough about Bluesky and what's going on there, and how empowering and exciting it is to be in that community, and how much it feels like the old world of community, social media, data science, Twitter.
Yep, and the fact that we can look at the sentiment and many other factors of this in many dynamic ways, thanks to the power of APIs, the power of our imaginations, really. So I'm intrigued by where the community goes on that space of it, and you won't find me first in line on that prediction approach, like what you saw here, especially in my industry. That is, that's a tough sell for us. So we will find out.
Yeah, predicting with LLMs, that turned my stomach a little bit when you said that.
If you are in an industry or, whether a large, mid-sized company, at this point, I'm sure, have some kind of internal tooling that's been set up at your organization and are surfacing some of the more low-hanging fruits, so to speak, of what AI can do in terms of integrating with other platforms. And I don't know how much common knowledge it is to the data science community as a whole, but I do, in my spare time, of course, listen to other podcasts, and it's been very apparent just how important Microsoft has been in OpenAI's life, if you will, with the funding that they receive. And of course, as you would imagine, Microsoft does have a lot of integrations with OpenAI. I literally deal with this on a daily basis, where in my meeting calls at the day job, about 5 seconds after the call ends, there's a summary generated by Copilot, just right there. It's happening, folks. So if you are in this ecosystem and you're looking at ways of how you can leverage AI models and maybe integrate with other services in a specific Microsoft type setup, our next highlight does show just what you can do in that space. And this post is coming to us from Martin Chan, who is a data scientist at Microsoft, where as I said, if you in your organization are invested in the Azure ecosystem, and yeah, Mike and I have had our adventures of Azure as well, they do offer an open AI integration. Now, the goal in this demonstration post that Martin has put together is, first part of the post is how you actually get set up for this, and there's no way I'm going to audio narrate that. That's all very straightforward with the screenshots and whatnot. But he wanted to use like a practical way to demonstrate how all this works. He was able to find a data set called the 100 Climbs data set, which is about different locations around the world. My guess is this is somewhere in Europe, if I had to guess, about the different attributes of these locations that would be relevant to a cyclist, including having a URL associated with each location that you could boot up in your browser and read about that location, one of which is called the Cheddar Gorge, or I'm probably not saying that right. Nonetheless, it's got some interesting information. And so what Martin wanted to do is take this data set, take the URLs associated with each of these locations, which again is just a field in the data set, leverage the RVest package to extract just the content of that summary of that location, or that description of that location, I should say, using a clever use of CSS div ID, so you don't get the fluff of the whole web page, just the content of that description location, and then leverage an OpenAI model, in this case a ChatGPT 4 Mini, within the Azure implementation of OpenAI. But much like other posts that we saw from Anastasia, I believe last year, he kind of built this up himself as a way to kind of learn how all this kind of works under the hood, leveraging the previous version of HTTR package to write a custom function to supply a call to the API using a prompt that he supplies a function parameter, and then returning the results back in JSON format, and then munging that for the rest of the analysis. And so definitely a pretty straightforward look at how all this works. But the results that he got from this, again, were quite promising, albeit didn't ask it to do a whole lot. It was a summarization of that location, not too dissimilar to what we saw in Stephen's post earlier. And in this case with this location that I mentioned, this Cheddar Gorge location in England, it kind of had the top takeaways of this article, such as the climbing details, how popular the location is, significance, the experience of it, and any local attractions around it. Again, does the job, right? But it was a neat demonstration of how you could leverage, building your own functions to do this. If you have to integrate with an AI model, but it's not as convenient as, say, what Elmer brings to you, if you are leveraging one of these hosted platforms that may or may not be offered by Elmer, then what Martin has done here can be an interesting way to prove that out, especially as in the context of this highlight here, you want to integrate this pipeline as part of others in that major ecosystem. So here we're talking about Azure. I could see a very similar thing with AWS and what they do with model hosting that you might want to integrate with, say, object storage or databases or whatnot. These are the kind of things that I know are happening more routinely in many industries. I'm still pretty new at it. I'm not as in-depth as many others like Martin is here, but it is interesting to see all the tech giants out there are trying to put services in front of these models to, again, make it, in their words, easier to run, but also integrating with their other pipelines. Again, just like we talked about in the last highlight, there's no such thing as a free lunch, so you will be charged for these API requests when you do these hosted model approaches. But I do know some of these platforms are also going to give their customers a way to not just run a off-the-shelf model like ChatGPT or whatnot. I know some of these vendors are also letting the company bring the open source models to that platform, and they just provide a front end to it. So that might be helpful in certain situations as well. That's not the topic here, but that's an area I'm looking at, I think, more closely this year when I look at how I integrate this in my daily work. nonetheless, a great summary here. The code is linked in the post, and all in all, if you're in the Azure ecosystem, you've got a lot of options available, and more power to you for what you can do there.
Yeah, a fantastic blog post walking through sort of this end-to-end process, including the custom call, if you will, to the API via HTTR. And it looks like I used the GPT-4o mini model from Azure's OpenAI integration. So it's nice for us in the highlights to be able to get to see a variety of these different types of LLMs. And one thing that he did, which I'm curious if Elmer allows for, is not only provide what's called a user prompt, but also a system prompt, which is sort of before you enter your user prompt, you're instructing the model what you want it to return and how you want it to behave. I think in the last example where he is asking for some information about the yellow spotted lizard, he provides a system prompt that says, describe the following animal in terms of its taxonomic rank, habitat, and diet. And then his user prompt is yellow spotted lizard. And the structure of the output is exactly what he had defined in his system prompt. So it's interesting how those two different things can work together. I know people do silly things with that system prompt that says, respond like you're Darth Vader or something like that, right? Or write me a poem about our stats in the style of Snoop Dogg or something crazy like that in those system prompts. But I think they're potentially very powerful in helping you somewhat fine tune, and I know that's a loaded word here in this context, but fine tune the output that you're going to get. And to me, I think that the future here in terms of applicability at your organization and really squeezing as much value out of these tools as possible has to be creating an easier path towards fine tuning, or retrieval augmented generation, which is still pretty heavy at this point, because you're still leveraging sort of this full LLM file, which has all sorts of context in it about things that you probably don't care about, right? And you have a specific task maybe that you're interested in leveraging generative AI to assist with. So I'm interested in projects like that I'll just shout out here, the Raza project, which I think is a Python framework, but it allows you to sort of combine, rules-based, I think, if statements, if you will, for natural language processing and natural language generation with large language models to be able to help build some guardrails around, the chat interface system that you are providing for your end users. So, my hope is that as we take a look at sort of more of these general use cases for LLMs, that we'll start to see more targeted use cases, that maybe are more deployable on a larger scope of problems at your organization, as opposed to, a lot of creative use cases at this point. At Catchbrook, we're knee deep right now in some R&D work in trying to build really the best text to SQL LLM model that we possibly can on a specific database that we have, that we expose for our end users, so that we can leverage Shiny Chat, essentially, which is the work that Joe Chang and his team have done to be able to build chat interfaces into our Shiny apps that are tailored specifically and perform really accurately against the database, and they write correct SQL. So we're still we found sort of more hurdles than we expected. I think in Joe's demonstration at ShinyConf last year, it seemed like it worked fantastically well. And I think that was a small data set with really obvious column names that sort of helped. And I think in a lot of real world use cases, and I apologize if I'm going off on a tangent now, but that's not necessarily the case. And these things aren't as accurate as you may expect on larger types of context windows. So that's stuff that we're working on. I'm excited, hopefully, to see this whole entire space start to, move, I guess, towards easier paths for developers to fine tune these generative AI models.
Yeah, I see that as the future as well, where you want a targeted model or a targeted setup of a model for a specific case, and that it is first in class in that specific case. I remember Joe telling me that in the RAG piece of it, when they were trying to summarize their Quartal documentation, he shared this in the R Pharma talk as well, it was completely off the mark compared to what they were expecting, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it. You would think that, just like we talk about in these two highlights here, that with a given set of text, it would know how to summarize that quite well. But it really depends on what's being fed into it and what the back-end model is actually doing. So part of me hopes that as these open source models get more mature, that there are ways for us to kind of tweak pieces of those and then make a different version of a model that's more tailored to like a, maybe like you said, a data context, maybe it's more tailored to a documentation context, or a more of a development context. So we're seeing a lot of these being attacked right now, and there's no real clear winner here yet. I think it's a lot of wait and see to see where a lot of this shakes out. So I'm curious where it goes as well. We're really trying to do the low hanging fruit currently, but it can't stop there. And we're hearing all talks about different advancements in the level of AI that's being prototyped right now. Sam Waltman's had some very provocative remarks about where that goes down the road. Whether it gets there this year, call me skeptical. I'm not sure. But I think the key part for us is to kind of slow down a little bit, do these more practical cases first, where we try to build a Skynet already, not to be too Debbie Downer on that.
No, absolutely. And I think we've made a lot of progress on our text-to-SQL work. I'm pretty excited about what we've been able to do in the last week or so, and I'm going to promise a blog post around that because I won't be the one writing it, so it'll actually happen in the next couple months.
Okay. Well, a human writer, or is AI going to write it? No, I'm kidding.
No, human writer. We have
okay.
Great,
you got the R Weekly ethos
resources
in you too.
Yes.
That's good.
But agentic AI, right? Agents are going to solve all of our problems. That's what LinkedIn tells me, at least.
Oh yeah, LinkedIn will tell you everything. I just want a robot that washes my dishes. Is that too much to ask? And our last highlight today, well, we're not going to talk about AI for this one because there's very much a human element that is used when we look at the best practices of visualization. And one area that you do have to address one way or another is your effective use of colors in your visualization. And luckily, the R ecosystem, R itself, has always been, in my mind, first in class in visualization since practically day one, even with base R itself. But if you're thinking about how can I get my head around what are some ways I can leverage colors in a better way, or how can I make it more routine in my visualization workflow? Well, no stranger to the highlights. Nicole Arini is back on the highlights for 2025 with a very comprehensive overview on how you can work with colors in R across many facets. So we'll tag team on this one. I will lead off with, first of all, you want to use a color. How do you actually define how to use it? Well, there's always more than one way to do things in R, and one way that's been supported since day one, the first way I learned, they have built-in names for colors. Obviously, the standards like blue, yellow, red, whatever, and many more. But you can just specify that when you want to define a palette for your visualization. She has tomato, sky blue, yellow too, and it's going to show up right there. Here's where it gets interesting. Maybe you want to be a little more low level with it. Maybe you want to integrate it with other parts of your visualization pipeline. That's where probably my favorite of the next approach is the hex codes, because I use those so much in my CSS styling of Shiny apps. It's kind of like that unit language that I'm used to now when I have a browser in my tab of these different like color pickers. I type in a name of a color, and then I get the hex code. I might get other values, but then I can copy that, put it into my app as like part of a class or whatnot, hex codes are the way to go for that. And what's nice is recent versions of Visual Studio Code and Positron, when you put this hex code as a character string with a pound sign in front, it shows you the color right next to it. I love that feature in my editor. So I've been a hex code, addict because of that. So I love that. If you want to get even more low level, RGB, the red, green, and blue mixture value might be very helpful, as well as things like HSV and HCL, which again, kind of putting more numbers on the different hues or the different intensities of this. Hex codes are kind of my bread and butter, but again, depending on where you are in your visualization journey, one of these is probably going to be what you end up using. So once you know how to use the colors, now, what are the best ones to actually use? This is where she gives a shout out to one of my favorite visualization packages, and that's Palantir by Emo over at Posit, where there is like, I think, over 100 of these specific palette packages in the R ecosystem. Palantir will let you use all of them and just choose which one you want to use. So she's got an example here looking at the Met Brewer palette, which is inspired by the Met Museum in New York. The Terra palette, for example, and you can just call it with a plot palette function right away and be able to use it. But you may find a set of color choices that you think look great. Keyword you. But, like I often tell my kids, it's not always just about you, right? Because there's a very important domain, Mike, that we really hope that many get more into their workflow, and that is accessibility. But Nicola talks to us a lot about new ways that we can think about accessibility when we choose these colors.
Yeah, I think accessibility around visualizations is something that we've talked quite a bit about on this podcast before, and I think the reason being is that it's really important to consider, and especially when you think about color palettes, right? There's a lot of folks who are red-green colorblind, and it's very easy with all of the tools that we have at our disposal to accommodate that, right? And avoid using your traditional red is bad, green is good color palette, even though that's what a lot of my clients want. Sorry. Unfortunately, we got to break them out of that cycle. I try really hard, I promise.
I get it.
And there's a couple of great packages that Nicola shouts out here. There's one called the Color Blinder package, no E there at the end, BLINDR. And that, I guess, it has a function called CVD Grid, which simulates how a plot that you've created may look to people with color blindness. That, to me, is absolutely incredible. I think that's awesome. In terms of sort of generating colors as well, once you have gone through and created have a couple of different palettes that are colorblind friendly, or at least have a workflow to assess the accessibility of the color palette that you have selected so that you can do that iteration. There's some additional tools, and one that I thought was super, super cool, because I've had a different workflow for doing this that is a little bit more manual, and I'm excited to switch over. There is an R package that I had no idea about called iDropper with a capital R at the end. And have you ever seen this package, Eric?
Long ago, and I almost forgot about it, so I'm glad Nicole reminded me here.
So I had always leveraged like a Chrome extension to be able to, be on a web page and click on a particular, essentially pixel on that web page and get the hex code, right, that's behind that pixel, representing the color that I want for brand styling. And this iDropper package allows you to specify a path to a particular image, which I think could be a local image and maybe a URL as well. I'm not 100% sure.
You can do both. Yeah,
you can do both.
Great.
It looks like. And you can specify the number of colors that you want to extract from that image, and it'll create a color palette by picking out the top, I would imagine, n number of colors that you specify in the n argument, colors from that particular image, and give you those hex codes that you can leverage in your own color palette. And I think that's really, really incredible. And as always, I love Nicola's blog posts. They're littered with code. They're really well articulated. The visuals in here are beautiful. I think it's a masterclass in palette generation and choosing colors for, not only accessibility, but also, visual styling and, creating these workflows. I mean, she leads off the blog post by creating this small little custom function for quickly visualizing a color palette, right in the plot viewer in your IDE. So simple, something that I should have, done a long time ago, but I am excited to mooch that code from the blog post and leverage that in my workflow, because I think utility here is fantastic. And maybe a related shout out that I think is probably appropriate to give right now is a recent project, I think, from the Posit team, where they're allowing you to create this brand.yaml file, which can be used across all sorts of different deliverables that you may have, including your Cordo or R Markdown, maybe even reports. I think your dashboards, your Flex dashboards, your Cordo dashboards, your Shiny apps as well, and you can just continue to sort of reuse this same YAML file with all of your corporate brand styling that you have across your different deliverables. So I think that's really, really cool. It allows you to define colors, logos, different fonts that you want to leverage. So I think that's, a nice shout out at the intersection of this kind of topic here. But fantastic blog post by Nicola, as always. And I learn a lot when she writes something.
Yep. And thanks to her wisdom here and many others in this visualization space, I feel like I don't necessarily need to pay some extremely high overpriced vendor to teach me about all this all the time. I can read this, I can play with it, and for my apps or for my given analysis, I have enough tooling at my disposal to at least get, a lot farther than I would be just on my own, for sure. I am keeping an eye on brand.yaml, like you said. They are still working on the Shiny for R support for that, but once that lands, I'm taking that and running with it. It does work with Cordo, as you said, so I'm thinking about that for my Cordo content. But yeah, when you think about what style do you want to put for those brands, or maybe another type of analysis, having knowledge about how palettes work and the best ways to choose and optimize them for accessibility. Yeah, this is must reading for any visualization analysis, in my humble opinion. Just like R Weekly itself. I think that's must reading for everybody too in the R community, but again, I'm biased and I'm proud of it. So Batul has put together an excellent issue here, and we'll give a couple minutes here for our additional finds. Well, Mike was the unwilling victim in the pre-show of hearing me speak once again about my enthusiasm for Nix these days, the packaging framework that's a slightly different take than containers. And thanks to Bruno Rodriguez and Philip, they have put together the Rix package for us to use Nix principles in the R side of things. And they just had a new version released as of about a week ago. And this version has a couple really important things that I've been waiting for that have landed the first support of. One of which is the ability, when you bootstrap these Nix environments for your R analysis, you can now specify a date for what you want to associate that analysis with, or the packages, I should say, for that analysis. And then Rix will take care of finding at that time the package versions that correspond to that date. Not too dissimilar to what we may have seen from the MRAN project that Microsoft ran many years ago, with a way to snapshot your packages based on a date. Now we kind of get that flavor in Rix as well with this new parameter. Also, for the REnv users out there, and I am one of them, you now have a function to take that REnv lock file and convert it to a Nix default profile that will, in different aspects, either try to get as perfect for the version of that package as possible or get close to it. There are trade-offs. It's not going to be quite one-to-one, but boy, oh boy, this is a huge advancement for me as I think about legacy projects and adopting them to a Rix workflow. So I'm super excited. I've already tried it out multiple times. It's working great, And I'm now using it with Positron, no less, to have a custom R environment fronted by Positron. I dictate the version of R, the version of packages. Positron just grabs it, and I am off to the races. I feel like a kid again, Mike. I can't get enough of it.
I love it. I love it. I'll be there someday. I'm not there yet, but I will be there someday, and you know it. I just lag a little bit behind you. I found a blog post in the highlights as well from Stephen Paul Sanderson, and it is in sort of my world of finance that we do a lot of, and it is an analysis of NVIDIA's recent earnings call that leverages, I guess, data in this platform called Dotada's knowledge platform, which is essentially a database designed for investment professionals. So if you're in this space, I think this is a really interesting way that it looks like now we're able to access financial statement, financial earnings call content from a sort of database-like structure instead of having to do all sorts of crazy sentiment analysis and natural language type of stuff to be able to make sense of this data. So I thought it was a really interesting blog post that I wanted to shout out.
Love it. Yeah, I'm going to be taking a look at that too. This machine I have here right next to me has an NVIDIA card that's over 5 years old. I may be upgrading soon, but not sure how much I want to spend on the bank on that because graphic cards prices are not exactly cheap these days. You can guess why.
Yeah.
Not just gaming anymore, folks. Nonetheless, yeah, it's a fantastic issue Bato has put together here. But the R Weekly project is, again, driven by the community here. And one of the best ways to help out is to send that great new resource via a pull request, which is linked at the top of the page of each issue. You can fill out a quick template. We'll get the curator of that week. We'll get it in for you. And also, we love to hear from you. We did hear from a few of you over the break. We'd love to keep that dialogue going. We have a contact page in the episode show notes that you can fill out. You can also get in touch with us on social medias. I am on Bluesky, as I've been speaking highly about. I am at our podcast.bsky.social. It's still not natural for me to talk about yet, but I'm getting there. I'm also on Mastodon with at our podcast at podcastindex.social. And I am sporadically on the X thing with at the Rcast. And Mike, where can listeners get a hold of you?
You can find me on Bluesky at mike-thomas.bsky.social or on LinkedIn if you look up Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK. You can take a look at what we're up to.
Awesome stuff. I love to see what you're up to on there. And yeah, let's keep the positive vibes going for 2025. That's our plans anyway. So thank you so much for being patient with us while we took a break at the end of last year. We are back in the swing of things of our weekly, and we're happy to share more great content on our road to episode 200 when we actually get there. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we will be back with another edition of our Weekly Highlights next week.